Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, where God is at work, a podcast where cross-cultural workers discuss everything from faith and fear to finances and faux pas. We're walking out our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauli, missions leader serving in Rome, and I'm here with Alessandro Di Leonardo, church planner in Cisterna di Latina. And we're actually missing today Jen Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. We just got a message right before connecting for recording this call that Jen originally was going to be gone traveling for a conference, but actually she had to cancel that conference as well because she got sick. So we'll be praying for Jen to feel better, to heal quickly, and we look forward to having her next time. How are you doing, Alessandro?
I'm sad to hear about Jen. Looking forward to having her again next time. I'm feeling okay. I think a bit tired. I just had missionaries stay with us for 10 days and 10 of them. And so that's always a blessing, but also a huge weight on the people hosting them, which in this case would be me and my wife.
Man, you guys must have a big house.
No. We Airbnb them.
Could you imagine everybody just sleeping on your floor? That used to be a thing when I was a teenager and we would go do evangelistic trips. We would just sleep on the church floors. So I don't hear of people doing that much these days.
Yeah, I haven't heard that today, but I've heard stories of like, oh, we used to do that.
Well, that's not the topic of our conversation today. Alessandro, did you grow up playing any sports, organized sports? What was that like for you?
Yeah, so having grown up here in Italy, and specifically Sicily, all the way until 9 years old, it was very hard for me to find organized sports. It wasn't until we moved to America, and actually a little bit later on, all the way into high school, that finally something was offered. And we grew up pretty poor, so we couldn't just go into, it had to be free. And so in high school, it was free. And so the sport that I did was, started out with karate, and I did soccer, but the real one that stuck, the one I really love, is wrestling. I did that for 2 years, and I wish I did it my whole life because 2 years is not enough. And then college, I thought about it, but it would have gotten in the way. I wasn't that good.
Wrestling, man, the wrestlers are built different, that's for sure. For me, it's been, I'm trying to remember when I started. I was really young, but my mom always wanted, to get us into sports, and she was a single mom, but she found a YMCA near our apartment. And so she went and got us signed up, my brother and I, for basketball at the YMCA. And that was an interesting time because, my brother is not very athletic. So he was kind of creating trouble. He didn't understand the concept of, the game and dribbling and not beating up the guys that have the ball and stuff like that. But I really loved it. But then my age group had no coach. None of the parents would step up. None of the dads. No one would step up to coach my age range. And so my mom stepped up to coach, and she had never played basketball really competitive. Wow. So that was always weird. I was the coach's son, but she really didn't know what she was doing. And eventually she recruited my older cousin and a friend of ours who had actually played really high competitive basketball. And then it was a whole different thing. And ironically enough, I never made the team once they came in as coaches. So that kind of shows you how bad I was at basketball. But
was your mom athletic in another type of sport?
Yeah, she always kind of dabbled in different things, and I don't know that she ever stuck with one single sport, but she was always doing something in her youth for sure. But then when I moved to Italy, I tried to play basketball when I was in my teens, and I realized that all the Italians were better than me, and that kind of was a shot to the ego a little bit. And so I was okay, I'm not going to play basketball. And I got introduced to rugby through my brother who had found rugby. And so since then it's been rugby. I've been involved in rugby for about 20 years now. It's been really good.
That to me is it's a sport that you just hear about. You don't really know what's it about. At least for me, I actually was surprised moving back to Italy, knowing how big rugby is in Italy. I had never been from the South all the way in Sicily. I'd never have heard of it, only when I came to U.S. and seeing movies and hearing a little bit about it.
Yeah, rugby is definitely bigger in the north of Italy than it is in the south, for sure. Yeah, so we're not here to even just talk about sports. Obviously, all of our conversations are this idea of how can we explore mission, explore what God's doing in mission. And today we wanted to look at this concept of being on mission within sports and what that looks like. And so, yeah, I would be curious to kind of hear how you were introduced to this concept of like using sports as part of your ministry and way of reaching people with the gospel.
In the US, I was part of a ministry that used music to reach people. And so I kind of, from there, understood that you can use something to bring about God's work or introduce God's work. So the concept already existed. But unlike you, Jesse, I have three brothers, but the one closest to me and who is also a missionary, he's the more athletic one than I am. And so I remember coming to Italy and kind of saying, yeah, I could see sports being used, but that's not me. I let him do the sports. I'm good at other things. But with the COVID, the Lord opened up a door through Athletes in Action. It was just starting up here in Italy, and it happened to be right at the same time that I was starting up here, and the guy who's leading it also found himself needing a friend, and I needed a friend because we were both new to Italy and trying to figure out our footing. In my case, church planting. In his case, Athletes in Action. So because of that, we helped each other in that sense, where I had a church and he had a ministry, a parachurch. And so together, that's how it really, I always knew the idea, but that's how it really became a reality to me that, oh, wow, actually, I don't need to be super athletic, or I don't need to be, I'm actually not into sports from a watching perspective. I don't know how you would say that. Like, I don't watch sports. I prefer just playing them. But I hate to say this, but we're recording this during the European Cup, and I did not watch it, not one single match. I just was overwhelmed with so many other things. So yeah, for me, that's how it was introduced to me.
Well, you might be an elite sports person. All of the famous sports people that I've like listened to interviews or got to talk to or anything, usually they're not big sports. Like they don't follow sports for entertainment purposes. A lot of them, or not their own sport. They might follow like a different sport just out of, but not their own sport. And so maybe you do have an elite sports side to you, but yeah, for me, I think because I came to faith in my teens when I was kind of also really getting competitive in rugby, I kind of have always wrestled with that question of like, how does my love for sport interact with my love for Jesus? For those of you that don't know about rugby, I mean, it's a kind of physical, some might say aggressive or violent sport because we're tackling each other and have no pads, similar to wrestling, I guess you could say in some ways. And so I always wondered, like, oh, can a Christian do that? Like, because for me, it was also an outlet of a way of getting out anger and aggression. Like, when you can run into somebody and hit them as hard as possible within the rules of the game, you can start to question like what's going on here. And some missionaries discipled me and helped me see that like you can be the best you can be in a sport and that being glorifying to God and ultimately a tool that God could use. And so then I've always looked for that now. I have had my times where like rugby became an idol, and I tell of I kind of have started to view my life as like Jonah's story, and can see where for me the belly of the whale and so forth and then the time on the boat for Jonah were kind of different rugby moments for me where I was chasing rugby over following the Lord. But once I kind of got that sorted, I started to always see like how can I leverage rugby for my faith and for sharing my faith. And at one point I started coaching, so then I thought, okay, how can I share biblical principles while coaching a secular, local team? And then I started finding out that a couple of guys on the team were Christians. So then I said, okay, how can I meet with them to disciple them as their coach and have that influence in their life? And so we met, a handful of times while they were part of my program. And then when I came to Europe, I kind of forgot and like kind of left rugby aside because I was afraid of it becoming an idol. But then that's one thing I love about doing missions with a team of people around you. The other people in my field kind of said, hey, we see that you need that outlet. Like we can see you have this built up energy and need to get that out somewhere. And so you should get back into rugby if you can. And so I looked around and found a great club that I really love. And so now I've started wondering, okay, how can I leverage that for the sake of the gospel. At the same time, our mission has what we call like impact zones, like ways that you can influence through different areas. So it might be church planting, it might be theological education. One of these is sports ministry, basically. I forget the exact name for it, but the idea is that, that anyone throughout the whole entire mission organization that's involved in that kind of area of ministry can resource and talk with each other and kind of encourage each other. And so one of the guys told me recently about a sports conference. And so I went to that, and it was really helpful to kind of understand what does sports ministry look like. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that as we go on. But why don't you kind of help us set up a framework of like, how do you view sports and missions? Like, what does that look like?
So the way, I guess, right from the beginning coming here 5 years ago, I was able to at least put a framework around the idea of what it looks like or if someone wanted to enter this world of sports for missions. The way I see it is in three sections. One would be evangelistic outreach, and I think that's the one that most people are thinking about when they want to use sports as a mission. I think that's the more popular one, meaning that you put in an event, a sports event, so you attract people so they can get to know your church or they get to hear the gospel. And that's it. It's a sports outreach, an evangelistic outreach. Under that, it could also be an opportunity, still under evangelistic outreach, where one of you or somebody in your team or yourself can enter a world of sports where you could bring the gospel in a way that maybe people would never be able to hear because they would never want to step into a church or into any spiritual gathering. And so that's like first category, evangelistic outreach. And then the second would be discipleship opportunity, where you either create a team where you get to, I think you kind of alluded to that, where you had a chance to disciple people, to bring about actual Christian principles to how to coach. And then, of course, that can have a nuance of evangelistic, because somebody could be in the church, someone can join the team, but they don't really have ever accepted the Lord. And through that, then they can hear the gospel clearly and see it lived out. So that would be the second. It would be discipleship opportunity. And the third one, I didn't think about this until actually when we started before recording, where there's also the idea where someone feels called to be a professional athlete. And just like the Lord calls us to do everything well for Him, to bring glory, to shine a light to darkness, there's those who are professional athletes, Christian, they have a faith in Jesus, and they just want to be a light. They want to be the best, not to bring glory to their name, but bring glory to Christ. And one example that I can think of, it's a movie I've just seen, and maybe you've seen it, is George Foreman, Big George, where watching it, I actually didn't really know much about George Foreman except for the grill. I grew up with that. And when I watched it, it's not a Christian movie, but his faith is so clear in his life that they couldn't take that apart or take that away from the movie. And pretty much he used, after coming to know the Lord, he used boxing as a platform, as an opportunity to be the best boxer so that he can bring glory to God. So the third category would be to be an athlete for Christ, an athlete declaring and living out the Christian life.
And that's interesting that you point out that third one. Yeah, I'm thinking of multiple people like that I know within the sports world. Obviously, we know some of the most current ones, but even someone like Jesse Owens, he was a Christian. Yeah, you named George Foreman. I'm thinking of some rugby players. Like for me, I think he's actually walked away from the faith, but at the time, Jason Robinson was one of the most famous rugby players, and he was a Christian. And he had came to Christ through another rugby player who was not as famous, but still pretty famous, who was a Christian. And actually, as we're talking, I'm thinking about another famous sports person that funded a big event that you and I were able to work on, Tim Tebow. He's another one that's been very outspoken about his faith. And yeah, this conference that I went to, it kind of well, the conference in general kind of divides itself into three categories. And so it kind of sees like competitive and elite sports people. So that could be players, coaches, managers as a category. And then it goes into, I forget the exact title. It's something like, fitness and wellness, like more like individual sports, like if you're in CrossFit or bodybuilding or those kind of things where it's like more of a gym sport. And then it has more like family sports, like if you do sports camps or, you're involved in like a sports club or something. So it kind of looks at those three areas. And that was really helpful for me to see that. But then even more specifically within that, they talk about this idea that you have just a sports person who doesn't necessarily proclaim to know Jesus. And then you have a Christian sports person who the only difference between the two is one proclaims Jesus. But then it talks about how those Christian sports people can become leaders that then have influence on both the Christian sports person and the non-Christian sports person. And then those leaders can actually become like mentors. And so then you kind of start seeing like the mentors are influencing and leading the leaders, but then they're also involved in sports. So they have access to the sports person and the Christian sports person. And you can just see how there's a cool graph they made, but it's this idea of like, sometimes I think we get stuck in like, oh, I can just play and use my platform. But actually the managers, the physios that are working on, the injuries and stuff, all of those people have influence on one another, and Christians can be found throughout all of those in impact.
I wonder if in this conference they talked about reasons why people don't use sports as missions. I mean, you kind of alluded to one where you were wrestling with the idea that maybe Jesus doesn't want me to tackle a person. And in my case, I wasn't a Christian when I was wrestling, but maybe Jesus doesn't want me to put someone in a position that they're in pain. So maybe that could be one category, not thinking that one can be competitive. But what are some other things that you can think of? Did they talk about anything as why people don't use sports?
I don't know that they didn't really talk about why people don't use it, but I think the idea was kind of, I think a category would be just unawareness, like not thinking of the sport as a way to use for your faith. Because I think, you and I can probably relate to this. There are areas of our life that maybe we forget that, also in that area, I am also a believer or, in Jesus. So I'm trying to think of like an example. Okay, a silly example could be taking your car to the car wash. Like in the moment of taking my car to the car wash, I'm not actually thinking, how am I doing this for the glory of God? I should be, but I don't necessarily always think in that way. And I think for sports, it's a similar thing. For some people, they just think of sports as like, this is my physical outlet. This is my way of staying fit. Maybe I'm doing that for the glory of God, trying to keep my body in shape as a temple and so forth. But they don't actually think of it as how can that impact the people around me. I know one of our missionaries, when I first took over leadership of the field and was meeting with him, and I was just asking him like, what's your ministry look like? And he's like, I'm not sure. He's like, but I had this cool story. I was in the gym and I was working out, and the guy asked me about, I forget what topic it was. Anyways, he's like, so that was really cool. And then the next week, someone came in and they started asking me about why do I have a family if I'm a priest? And I was like, well, I'm not a priest. And he's like, but so and so said you're a priest. You're the priest of the gym. And this guy, is a big bodybuilder guy. And he's like, so I just started realizing that like in the gym, I'm having opportunities to share my faith. And I was like, do you see that that's your ministry? Like that is, you're ministering through your presence in the gym. And that's a cool thing. Like you don't have to like think, I don't have ministry yet. Like that's ministry, the fact that you're out there. And so I think sometimes we just need to help people see the opportunities that are in front of them because they just get overlooked,
Yeah. I would say for me, and just recently, I think the Lord has helped me see otherwise, is that I felt like I had to be somebody to then declare that I can, to kind of have a way to be a voice, right? To have a voice. So like I wrestled, but I didn't place or anything. I didn't win any gold medals. And in my mind, I felt like if you're going to do something, you need to be the best. So then you could be different and could say something. And that's been a challenge. But just recently kind of realizing, I think God has designed me more to be a coach. I always thought a coach had to be someone who actually did some amazing things. And then your story about your mother just was very encouraging. where like, no, some people are just good at leading others to greatness. And I kind of reflecting on that, I realized that that actually was something I was good at when I was in wrestling. I actually won the leadership award, and I was one of the many leaders. They made everybody leaders, but I was the only one who got it. And this is before I knew Christ. It's just I knew how to get people to understand the moves. I knew how to encourage them. I knew how to lead them, but I didn't know how to do that to myself. And so I always thought that, oh, then I couldn't do that. But I think if we can let people know that they don't need to be like a professional sports person. Thus, if you are, then you can do sports ministry. No, you could be a regular Joe and go ahead and if God put that desire, you can go ahead and start a sports ministry or use sports for missions.
Yeah, I forget where the proverb comes from, but someone says those who teach can't do, and those that do can't teach, or something along those lines. So no, yeah, that's true. And I think, that was the same for me. Like, I was decent at rugby. I'm not going to lie and say, like, oh, I have some false humility. Like, I was a pretty good player, and I was a starter on our teams. But I didn't have that, X factor that would take me to a pro level and higher. But when I was coaching, I started seeing, like, I was pretty good at identifying talented players. And I'll never forget it, but there was one player that came to me in the middle of Iowa. And he said his dad called me. He's like, my son wants to play rugby. He's never played before. He's never even heard of it. He's only just seen it on Google and like Googling YouTube videos of big hits and stuff. And I said, sure, bring him. And so he came to a couple of practices, and I had asked to have a meeting with the parents. And I sat them down over a pizza and just said, hey guys, I want you to realize, like, your son actually probably could go professional. And like, if you actually like look after him, he's too young to look after himself at this point. So you kind of have to look after him as far as his eating and his training and stuff. But I think he could go all the way. And that was, I forget how many years ago, but 2 years ago, he got a pro contract. And it was this crazy, it was a realization for me, like, okay, yeah, I didn't, like, it was his own ability. It wasn't me that made him a pro, but I saw that in him and was able to encourage that and try and set him up for success the best I could, I should have negotiated like a 10% deal or something, but no, it is important to think of how whatever we're doing in our life can be used for God and I think how you framed it, that idea of like as an evangelistic outreach, that's as important as a discipleship opportunity too. But I would say, from my experience, and I would be curious to know your experience, it's hard. The world of sports is hard, I think, because you are trying, well, you're even team sports, or individual sports, like, there's an element that, yes, you're thinking of others and you want the team to win, but really you're fighting for a spot on the team. You're trying to get your position. You have a high discipline of like working out and eating and all these different things, especially at the, higher levels. And so it's easy to be self-absorbed and think about yourself more than thinking about others. And I found, like, even with non-competitive sports areas that we've been involved in, sometimes making that translation from the sports talk and the, camaraderie that comes with that, it's hard to transition sometimes to the spiritual side of things. What has that been like for you? Like, what have you seen in that kind of moving from sports to actual spiritual conversations with people?
Yeah, so just to kind of answer a little bit of what you were saying before about the idea of that it's hard. Sports is demanding. Like, I kind of said one thing, but I also want to clarify that, yes, you don't have to be the best, but you also can't be bad at it. Because it does have sort of like, let's use music, for example. If you really are lousy at it, no one wants to follow a lousy person. And so the same thing with sports. And to be good in sports requires so much physically, mentally, emotionally, in the field and outside the field. So there's this huge weight to it, demand. And so sometimes I think in one way I could see myself being discouraged to go into sports because ministry, church planting, missions are demanding. And so to kind of add something else, it's like, oh man, could I do that? That's something to consider and think about, but also realizing that our Christian life is demanding. And so the two actually complement each other. I love how Paul describes to Timothy that our Christian life is as a soldier, as a farmer, and as an athlete. And those are, he uses these three examples, and realizing that actually, as difficult and as demanding as sports are, it complements well with our Christian life, and so something to consider. But then going to your second question about like how has it been an opportunity to share, it really depends which of the three you go after. Because if you go starting from the bottom one, being a professional athlete where you then have a voice, I think in that sense you have the ability to say what you want because you kind of earned the voice to say it. And so in that way, I definitely don't have that platform. Discipleship opportunity, we don't have, at least in our church plant, an opportunity. We haven't gotten to a place. I would like to. I'm praying about it. A place where we can do a sports team, like a fixed sports team. So the most I've done is sports outreach. And how spirituality has come about, and this looks, remember we talked about contextualizing. This can look different in different places. Here in Italy, just getting people through the church doors is already a win. And so for us actually doing sports event in our facility looks like more like a multi-purpose room. And so for people to walk in and see, oh, wait a minute, this is what an evangelical church looks like. Hey, you guys are normal. Hey, you guys are actually pretty cool. That has been the way that has opened up a door to spiritual conversation, or at least lowering down the guard. And then, hey, would you like to come to church? It doesn't happen right away. Hey, would you, or sometimes people ask me question, what is the difference between you guys and so? What do you guys believe in? So for me, that's how the experience has been about using sports as an opportunity to open a door where people can then see that we're normal people, or actually even different, because we serve a God and we have a God that loves and cares. And so that's sort of how my experiences have been.
A whole church community could look around at their resources, their facilities, or the manpower they have, and host either other sports groups in or host their own sports event. That's a good one. I think this is something that is a little bit of I don't know what the right word is, a soapbox, but I'll try not to be on it too long. But sometimes I feel like churches can fill their schedule so much throughout the week with Bible studies, men's groups, prayer groups, second Bible studies, the Sunday service, the youth group, the pre-youth group meetings, and you can have, besides your workday, all your evenings filled with church events. But then that doesn't allow for the church members to be in the community and to participate into clubs and associations where they can be salt and light in the world around them. And so I think that's another big opportunity, is for pastors and for people. I actually met a church planter years ago who said, my goal is to be as efficient as I can be in edifying the church body with 2 days a week, so that they can be as effective as possible the other 5 days a week in the world for the advancement of God's kingdom. And I thought that's always stuck with me, because it's like, yeah, like it's okay for us to be involved in a sports club in the local community where there's probably not very many Christians there, and we can be part of that. So I like what you're saying. There's both sides of that coin. We can invite people in, use our space. They can see that just from context that they're in. But then also I think the other side of that is we can send people out into the community, into those environments. And so what are some resources that we might be able to kind of turn? Someone is going to be listening to this and they're going to think, wow, I never thought of using my bike riding that I do every week, or, the jogging that I do weekly, or whatever it could be, as a way to share the gospel with people. What are some resources out there for them, Alessandro?
To kind of be generic, first of all, is wanting to say that you are probably not going to start something that didn't exist unless you invent a sport.
Right.
So just already starting from there, I may not have all the resources, but spiking, like right off the top, I know that athletes, being involved in Athletes in Action, I know that they have a ministry specifically geared for those who like to go biking.
I think cycling is the word we're supposed to use.
Cycling.
It shows how much we are involved in that.
Yeah. No, because I'm thinking of the Italian word, and so that I lose my English sometimes. But yeah, cycling and so just to kind of say like, hey, you might not find it right away, and I think you were kind of telling me that before we started recording that sometimes it's just hard to find resources, but they're out there. So start with that. Just knowing that okay, this is something I want to do. Someone's has it. I'll give you an example. Actually, what we started doing in our church is actually doing a lot of sports ministry with people who are in the world of disability, specifically mental disability. And I would never have thought that I could be involved in something like that, someone leading it. But there's so much resources. It seems daunting, but it actually isn't, because once you see that, oh, there's other people who have actually pioneered and actually have gone through that. I'm not saying that there can't be something that no one's ever done. There's always that. There could be a niche that maybe God is really calling you to be the pioneer. But for the most part, we're all blessed to follow someone else's footsteps, and that's a good thing. So, given that, some of the again, advertising Athletes in Action, their website, you can go there. But really, the best resources are people. Find someone who's doing it, talk to them, and they can then lead you to other people. They might not necessarily be doing the sport that you are wanting to do, but they're doing something and it's working or it makes sense. And you could be like, okay, I'm trying to do wrestling and this guy's doing basketball. Let me have a conversation with him. What does that look like to gather people? What does it look like to use basketball as a discipleship platform? And then a lot of it can be then transferred to your sport. Door can open. So I think community, reaching out to people who are doing it, is the best.
Yeah, I don't have any books really off top. I know there's some podcasts out there. You kind of look up sports ministry and athletes, Christian athletes, or different things like that. This conference I went to is put on by a group called I think Go Sport, if I remember correctly. But they have some conferences, some resources. But really, I think, yeah, I would agree with you. I think ultimately the biggest resource is going to be community. Community and finding people that also have faith and are involved in sport. And it doesn't have to be your same sport. That's the other thing. Sometimes it's just finding someone who gets the idea that, okay, as a sports person, you face unique challenges or you have unique situations that you're trying to navigate. I don't want to drag this podcast on too long, but a couple fun stories from this conference. There was one guy there who was talking about cricket. I don't know anything about cricket, but he was talking about how at a competitive level, there was this cricket player who was a Christian who was really, really good. And apparently he had made some mistakes. If I get the story, I might be getting the story wrong. No, I think I got it right. Anyways, he had made some mistakes. He had a bad day and he had to get out of the game. And he walked into the locker room and just threw his bat across the room and was so angry. And there's a young guy there that wasn't a Christian at the time. And he's like, when I saw the Christian guy was competing as hard as he could and was upset when he didn't do well, that helped me see, okay, Christians are real people, and I could be a Christian because I also get upset. And so it was just interesting how that testimony of him just being authentically himself and expressing his emotions, even right or wrong. The Christian didn't know that anyone else was in the locker room when he threw the bat. He actually probably thought he was alone. But that was something that made a big difference. And so that was really interesting. Another one was there was some female soccer coaches and elite players, highly competitive players, and they were talking about the locker room and just how hard and dark it is in the female soccer world. There's just a lot of push from the LGBTQ community in that area, and so they were just talking about how like the importance of Christians that can counter that darkness and bring light and bring hope and joy and truth to that environment in a loving way while still competing at the highest level in the sport. And so those were just areas where I was thinking like, okay, we face different challenges and unique situations that probably, the person singing in choirs isn't going to face, and that's okay. So if we can find somebody that can relate a little bit more to the sports world, that's helpful for as a resource to say, hey, how do you face this situation? What do you do when you're in this different environment? So so that was Go Sport. But ultimately, I think one of the things I want to encourage everybody as we wrap up this podcast is the power of prayer. I think praying for your teammates, praying for the people in your community. But then I'm thinking of, we can be praying right now. This summer is the Summer Olympics in Paris. Well, it's all of France, really, but the Paris Olympics. And we can be praying for the Christian athletes that are going to be competing. Like I mentioned earlier, Jesse Owens was a Christian competing in the Olympics. I don't know all their names, but there are Christians competing in the Olympics this year. And how can we pray for them? How can we pray that they would stand strong and that they would say no when faced with temptation, that they would be able to be a gospel light to their world? We can be praying also for the Christian communities around these events. We know that sports events bring a lot of darkness with them. There's a lot of trafficking and different ugly things that happen around major sports events. And so how can we be people who are praying for athletes and for coaches and managers and the gospel to go forth throughout these environments? So I think I would love to challenge everybody who's hearing this to be praying for the Paris Olympics right now and as we go on. And other than that, thank you so much. We missed Jen today. She also is involved in sports, and so she would have loved to be on here. But we miss her. We look forward to her coming back. And just want to say again to everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for the different ratings we've received. Please continue to find us on all the platforms. Give us a rating, give us a follow, and send these podcasts on to anybody that you think would benefit from listening to them.